Hello from our program, Freely and Critically, conducted by me, Tomas Kavaliauskas, and Professor Gintautas Mažeikis. Today, our special guest is Stam from Sweden. He's a senior research and senior lecturer in literature. Today, our topic is Swedish, Finnish, Lithuanian writer Henry Parland, who lived in Kaunas very briefly during interwar. However, his literature heritage is very rich, and we would like to talk about him with the expert, especially now that we have the special occasion. Kaunas is European cultural capital, and Henry Parland is our literature heritage. So maybe the first question for you, what is the legacy of Henry Parland in Sweden and in Finland? Is he equally valued, remembered in Sweden and in Finland, or does he have a different legacy in these two countries?
Since he was Finland-Swedish, so his legacy is more well known in Finland. Most Finland-Swedish people have at least heard of him and talked about him and sometimes read him. So it's much more well known in Finland. But those who really like poetry and literature know about him in Sweden as well. There is one poem that is often quoted, and it is a very famous poem, but sometimes people think it's written by someone totally different. So the poem is more well known in Sweden than than the writer. But since the 80s, there have been a little bit of a revival since his novel was published, and during the last 5 years, we have published his collected works in Finland and in Sweden.
So maybe Gintautas, you would like to?
Yes, you know, that's actually, when Tomas said that it's Lithuanian as well, it's more or less a joke. That he's not very well known in Lithuania, but in a way he's very important because he described this cafe, restaurants, you know, environment in not only in Helsinki but as well in Kaunas of this time, and the feeling of city and this structure of his novel Two Pieces. As well presuppose knowledge of two cities, Kaunas of this time and Helsinki, as were pubs, first of all. But in many cases and many literary critiques, okay, but maybe first of all, because only few probably our listeners know about the novel Two Pieces, you know. Could you a little bit to tell us about what and why this novel is important?
Yeah, it's important because it's an early modernist novel. It was written for competition, inter-Scandinavian competition for the best novel in 1931, and it was written in Kaunas. But the plot is that the writer, who has the same name as the author, is sitting down to write a novel and to tell the true story about a girl he knew. But it becomes a story about an earlier life and a story about Helsinki. But the frame is situated in a small country, small foreign country, which is, of course, Lithuania and Kaunas. So the telling of the story is from Kaunas, although Kaunas is never mentioned. It's only mentioned as a small foreign town.
Yeah, but you know that many of critics write that, and you as well mentioned, that this novel Two Pieces have some relationships, at least some vision about Marcel Prost, in the search of lost time, you know, and this is about story as well about in some way about memory, remembering. But from the other side, you mentioned about modernism, and there is the problem, but it's not. I am not quite sure that we could characterize Marcel Proust as a modernist. We ordinarily consider him a little bit differently. And when we are talking about modernism, could you explain what do you mean by modernism here?
The modernism of the novel doesn't really have connections with Marcel Proust. Primarily, it's the way it's written, and Parland uses his usual technique from the poems to make things alive, to animate small things and the environment. And as you say, it's a book about memory, but also the modernist part is that you can't trust your memories. When you tell the story, or the author, the writer in the novel, when he tells the story, he suddenly figures out that it doesn't tell the truth. You can't tell a true story. So it's more that part of it that makes it a modernist novel. But it's about photography. Photography is like a metaphor for how the memory works.
Yeah, the novel starts from his the author or protagonist vision to the mirror, and some of critiques as well related with some reflection of the breaked mirror, or that the two pieces means as well some kind of breaking. So there is two major metaphors, mirror and photography. But from the other side, we see some technical description, you know, these chemical processes of photo. And for some readers, probably it's not quite clear how is important this technical description, this some kind of photo alchemy, I call it. You know, that's some photo alchemic approach. Many of the photographers said as well that he used the language of this photochemistry very old. He doesn't take modernist language or chemical processes. He used much more older. You know, that's. Could you a little bit comment about this one aside? What does mean this photography in the novel, and how it works as a literary work?
For once, I think the description is, I think it describes what solutions and that he has, developers that he knew about. So they might have been old, they might be the ones that his father used, but it's a thorough description, but it is also a metaphor for memory. So it's both. And I tried to follow the instructions, and they seem to be okay. I have also been in a photographer's lab, but not with those old stuff. But this was 1929, so.
And how this one modernistic and as well this technical animation of technical and some animation of some things, you know, how it's related with the formalism as well, because you know and some of critiques mentioned, and probably and you know better than we, that some critics try to connect him with a surrealism, which is not, I'm not sure that is the right way of his interpretation. but or even with the Dadaism, which I'm not sure as well. But in any way, please, because we're talking on this language, modernism, you know, formalism. What does mean formalism here?
I think the animated objects are more connected to futurism, and I don't think there's any real connection to surrealism. When Parland was introduced in a Lithuanian magazine in 1929, they called him surrealist, but I have not really heard it many more times.
Yeah, I accept your this position about futurism, and if we will check his friends, at least in Lithuania of this time, many of them was wander from avant-gardism and futurism, but not about surrealism, which was not popular, and even probably nobody knows and nobody knew in Lithuania in this 2930 about surrealism, you know. Yeah, but in any way, a little bit more, please see about the formalism. For example, Viktor Shklovsky and so on, because it's related with Sezaman as well.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. We know from his notes that he read Viktor Shklovsky in Kaunas, probably in late summer 1929, because we have the notes. And it seems, it's quite sure that the thing he read was a short pamphlet called Literature and Cinematography. The notes seem to tell that story. And he was inspired and wrote some articles in Swedish. And the Shklovsky Ostranenie. Yeah. How do you say it in English? You say estrangement or...
Yeah, because this is the two concepts, alienation. It's not отстранение. It's different because, you know, that's...
No, yeah, it's not alienation. No. It's estrangement or defamiliarization. So this distinction, automatization and defamiliarization, he describes that in his articles quite good. And he draws the line to Shklovsky. And in the novel, the travel from automatization to defamiliarization is what drags the story forward. So when he looks in his mirror, he says, oh, the mirror must have some new things to see, otherwise it would get bored, automated. So, and also the story about Ami, his girlfriend, is quite interesting until he gets to know her more, and his preconceived conceptions about her are false. So that what's it called?
Yeah, I think this отстранение or defamiliarization, which you translate, it's very important to explain this novel, because, and this is difference I see from Marcel Prost, who is not very involved into this breaking of knowledge, or it means that defamiliarization always is not just formal way, but as well, I would say there is some existential elements that you know and know guy, and one moment you feel that you don't know him at all. And this, you know, the losing of relationships, or this, you know, some kind drama of defamiliarization. I think that it's important. Do you see differences between, not similarities, but differences between Marcel Proust and Henry Parland?
Yeah, there are lots of differences. One of them is that the memory comes to Marcel in Proust's novel, the involuntary memory. Suddenly something happens, but
Yeah.
Parland, or the Henry in the novel, he develops the photo just to get that thing, and then he thinks about a gray hat to remember his doppelganger. So he tries to reach his memory, which is a big difference. And yeah, they work quite in different ways, but they both.
Do you think that it's quite astonishing how much education and awareness in the world of literature, understanding and feeling of avant-garde movement Henry Parland had, considering his such young age? Doesn't it take you as a surprise? Usually at that age, we have people just after high school, being bachelor students in the university, trying to understand what is going on in the world of literature. And here this guy comes, has quite awareness, feels all the streams, all the fashions. Do you think it's because of the influence of Professor Vasily Sezaman, or do you think that it's somehow he's just a natural genius?
In some ways, you could call him a genius, of course, but he was interested in new literature and new art, and that was in Helsinki as well. So he and his Finland-Swedish colleagues, Gunnar and Björling, he read the Querschnitt, the German magazine. They read Dadaism and so on. But I think it is a mistake to make Henry Parland a philosopher. I mean, he read Shklovsky and something clicked in him. He understood this. He had read Mažeikis and so on, and this way of thinking attracted him. But I think his brother used to say that Parland had like a mathematician or a natural philosopher. He had this structural thinking, which made him, he could understand things and he could write about them quite quickly. But you shouldn't overestimate his knowledge of Russian formalists, for example. But just to in a few weeks read and understand, it's not bad.
Yeah, but
and also Prost. We don't know how much he read. Maybe it was the first part or something.
I think that the same important is his communication with Vasily Sezaman, because I think that it was not so easy to understand Viktor Shklovsky, and because Sezaman was involved more into understanding of Russian formalists and was in some friendship with Zhirmunsky as well. So he could explain probably some moments, because, for example, we discussed with you about this odstranение or defamiliarization as some technique. In any way, on my opinion, as a teacher, you first of all you need to interpret, to understand with somebody, because I'm sure that between Lithuanians, between Lithuanians that he knew in this time and communicate with them, very rare hear about this Russian formalism and influences. And we don't see in Lithuania literature in this time the people or writers more or less inspired by Russian formalism. So he was very alone in this, very alone, and it's very difficult to understand how he could understand without proper education, you know, just to take an article, you know, or books, you know, to read them, you know, to interpret for ourselves, and immediately to start to use this method for the writing of novel. This is something unbelievable, you know, that should be.
But yeah, of course, Sesman was important. I think he probably borrowed the book from Sesman. That's what I think. But the strange thing is that if you look at the biography, during the summer, Sesman was away and Parland lived at his house or his apartment. So Sesman was away in Paris and also in Russia or in the Soviet Union for traveling and meeting his family and so on. So during this crucial time, he wasn't there. So they could have talked about it and so on, read this and so on, but the working on the pieces, but I mean, we also know that Sesman wasn't the only guy, only man or the only one scholar in Lithuania. So he had this friend Vera Sotnikova, but also a young man called Dima Markovic, and during the work on the collected works of Parland, in his archive there are some texts in Russian which are not written by Parland, and one of those texts we have been able to see that his friend Dima Markovic, we have a few letters from him, has written it. So this even younger person who was interested in Soviet film has not instructed but at least communicated with Parland about Russian art. So it makes it more interesting and harder to focus how it all appeared.
You mentioned Vera Sotnikova, his girlfriend, and she was an expert on Jewish theater in Kaunas. It's funny to remember that Parland wrote a review about some performances in Kaunas drama theater, Jewish drama theater, or was it Jewish-Russian? Because Vera Sotnikova was Jewish-Russian. So, and he wrote a review for Helsinki magazine, or was it just a newspaper?
It was for Hufvudstadsbladet, yeah, the daily paper, yeah.
Saying that in Kaunas, theater is much more advanced, much more modern than Finnish theater. And I understood that it is thanks to Vera Sotnikova that he became a regular visitor of theater, and she also instructed him about the new tendencies in theater. So that's one part of my question regarding theater. Another part of this question is Vera Sotnikova as such, as a person, because if I'm correctly if I correctly understood, she was also a romantic girlfriend of him. But when he died unexpectedly because of illness, she became a fiancée and later married Lithuanian poet Radauskas. And they spent honeymoon in Paris, and then they, after this, or before the World War II, or during it, moved to the United States, to Washington, D.C., and she looked much older than she really was in life, and Radauskas looked younger than he was in his real age. So in Washington, they in Lithuanian American community, they appeared as an older woman, as an aunt with her nephew, whereas they were husband and wife. So two questions in one. The role of Vera Sotnikova for theater understanding in Kaunas, and she as Henry Parland's romantic girlfriend, if she was his romantic girlfriend.
It's a big question. Let's start with the theater. Yeah, she's in Parland's letter. He introduces her as dance instructor at this Jewish theater. And if you search Wikipedia about the Hebrew theatrical studio in Kaunas, you can find a picture from 1927. And in the middle of the picture, Vera Sotnikova is situated. So she had some role in that theater, that's for sure. And she was like 5 years older than Parland. And yeah, you have seen pictures of them and so on. Yeah. And I think Henrikas Radauskas was like 7 years younger than her. It's not much, but if, yeah. Anyway, and through Sesemann, he became acquainted with Sotnikova. And all the sources can tell that, at least that she seemed to be in love with Parland. And that's the story. I have also read it in articles about her life with the Radauskas. But we have parts of Parland's diary or personal notes, which tells about their liaison. So, but it seems that sometimes they were together, sometimes they were not. And the strange thing is, when he told about her to his parents, he never mentioned this. But she wrote to them after he died and said that they were engaged. So they must have had different views on the relationship. Young people, things happen. It can become complicated. So, and from his letters, we can also see that he fell in love with another girl. So it was complicated. But anyway, they stayed in touch and so on for quite a long time. I don't know really much about her background. Maybe you can tell more.
But I imagine that Parland and Sotnikova, they had a very rich bohemian lifestyle, theater, literature, and on Parland's part, it seems like there was some heavy drinking. I don't know if it's a myth or is it a true story that supposedly Parland was sent to Kaunas by his parents in order to move him away from alcohol environment in Helsinki. Supposedly, a very proper, orderly Professor Vasily Sesemann should take care of that problem, but it did not happen. Parland found a very rich bohemian atmosphere, and I think he was spending time in Metropolis restaurant on the main pedestrian street in Kaunas. So this richness in politics, Václav Havel, I think, was that kind of person who knew how to make compatible being a president, a dissident, former dissident, and appreciate rock music. And here it seems like Henry Parland was also Kaunas iconic person. Too bad that he lived too shortly. Otherwise, I think we would have a statue for him here. What is your impression as a researcher on that picture that I just described?
Yeah, for sure he drank too much. That was one of the reasons the parents wanted to get him out of Helsinki, the drinking and the bohemian lifestyle, and he was supposed to study law, but he didn't, and he also borrowed money, and since he was underage, the not very rich family were supposed to be the ones who paid if he couldn't pay. So stop, we must do something, and they sent him away. They didn't know for how long, and they didn't know if it would work, but I think the main idea was get him away from Helsinki. And since I haven't gotten to know two of Parland's brothers, Oscar and Herman, and both talk very warm about Seesman, and especially Herman, because he was some kind of, an uncle that took care of them and talked with them like they were adults, even when they weren't, and so on. So it must have looked like a good idea. Let's send him to Kaunas and see what happens. It couldn't be worse, they thought.
Yeah, but I'm not sure about Tomas' question, that Bohemian not always are related, and Parland case as well, with alcoholic drinking. And if we will pay attention about his essay and novels, it's more about cafe culture than about restaurants or, and cafe Kaunas in this time is some public spaces, and the love of his and all these images in public spaces of cafe presuppose some sort, as well of literal opinion. What does mean in any way? What does mean this bohemian style of life? Because that's okay. There is some such kind of stereotype that it's some drinking, but it's not always. It's a little bit larger, I would say, concept about his form of life, because in other way he was not. He will be not so productive as a writer. That's probably it was more pose, I would say, sometimes in poetry maybe, than that reality. Bohemian life, yes, I agree about it. What's your comment about bohemian life? What does mean it?
It doesn't matter what we call it, but we know that he drank sometimes too much, but that's not or out of the ordinary. But in a letter to a friend, he says that he's an alcoholic, and that's very much to say when you're 20. So the drinking got out of hand.
Maybe
he drank himself. Yeah, but such things happen. But he was a hard-working author. He didn't drink all day, all night, and he had this work ethic, which made him write very much. And in Kaunas, he also worked half-time at the Swedish consulate.
On Potvinska Street.
He had to work.
On Potvinska Street, number 64.
Okay, yeah.
It's very interesting that we are sitting with Tomas now in Potvinska Street as well.
But only number is 23, and Parland was number 64.
Okay, yeah. The other side of the street was further away, yeah.
Yeah, that building where Parland worked now is also the Devil's Museum.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
It's a world-famous Devil's Museum. It gets lots of tourist buses. However, it is not interactive. It's a very static museum. It has 3 floors with all kind of folklore, Lithuanian big and small devils.
Yes, it's just folklore museum and nothing, no relations with Satanism or satanic movement, you know. Even there is no relations with Gothic, you know, a subculture or someone. It's people who would like to see satanistic some museum, no, they will be disappointed. It's just folklore.
Okay.
But
statues of devils and so on.
But on that building, in 2007, there was an opening of a plaque to Henry Parland.
Yeah,
Till
I've
2007, there was no plaque. It was incognito. And since 2007, we have this official plaque. I unfortunately I did not attend that opening, but I heard that Henry Parland's brother attended.
Yeah, I think Herman traveled. Yeah.
And I looked at Wikipedia, and I did not find his date of death. Is he miraculously still alive?
No, Herman died before the pandemic in maybe 2019 or 2019. Yeah.
So just a few years ago.
Yeah. He was born in 1917. So, and I visited him a few times the last years in Helsinki. He was at a home for elder people, and his hearing wasn't very good. But yeah, we talked about stuff. He was very interested in history. He usually started his stories way back. And he also got the first part of Parland's collected works, the thick book with the poems, and I have a picture where he sits and reads it, which is fine.
Please show it to us if you could find it. Could you find that picture?
Probably, yeah.
You could open and show it to us.
Yeah, but I have to open the internet.
Oh, it's not in the book.
No, because he has the book is printed when he has it in his hands.
I see.
Parland wrote one of the title of his papers was The Revolt of Things, and you wrote about the papers, some kind of manifest of him, and later you discussed this revolt of things with some jazz activity or jazz music, and you know that's relationship between отстранение and then about I would say object animation and jazz is not quite clear. What is the role of jazz in his literature, in his novels, essay and poetry, because many of critics, as you as well, mentioned this jazz element. But jazz in this time, it's only the end of 20s, the end of 20s. What kind of jazz it could be?
I read about the jazz in Helsinki at that time. It came through mostly German or mid-European orchestras, so it had a cabaret touch, and in German they call it Lärmjazz. They hit things and played very fast. But the story about jazz in Helsinki, in some of the years at the end of the 20s, there was a boat with some American jazz musicians who taught Finnish jazz musicians to play more of a real jazz, but it's hard to really. I found some recordings of Helsinki jazz music from the end of the 20s, and I mean, it's fast music, and I think for him, in that The Revolt of Things, which he wrote several years before he went to Kaunas, it's from 1926 or 27, but he says something like, you should give the things your attention because they are alive as we, or even more alive. And then he ends it all with something about a tie, which is the saxophone in the jazz band of life. So the saxophone also looks like a tie. So there are that connection. But he also started to write an essay about jazz, or an article that was never finished. And nowadays you could say that it's, although he writes about jazz in 1927, but I mean it's the music of the natives or the black people, and it's some kind of natural primitive music, which was one way of describing jazz in that time, but it doesn't really say something unique. And he didn't finish the article. It ends suddenly, and we don't. It was never printed until in the 1960s. But he was interested in jazz, and he was supposed to be a good dancer as well. There's dancing in two pieces as well.
And the
how to behave on the dance floor.
Yeah, dances is very important element as well. It's strange. I'm not sure that he read Andrei Bielый, that Russian writer who always wrote before him about dancing as some essential existential element. And many of contemporary researchers in Russia, like, for example, Valery Podoroga, who analyzed Russian formalism, they try to use these elements for the explanation of the topic of dancing in Bielый novels. And it's interesting that Parland as well is very attentive, I would say, to the dancing and this choreography, and that's women, legs, and this description from the one side. And could you comment this dancing element in his literature, in his novel, at least, because I would say it's not so simple to describe what you write about dancing, as some element. Do you have some interpretation of this topic?
No, I think it's one example of his tendency to give not instructions but an analysis of what happens on the dance floor. How should you, and also the hierarchy. Who is everyone looking at? Who has control over this room? The structure of it all. I think that's what is interesting for him. He also wrote an article about fashion, men's and women's fashion in the end of the 1920s. How does it change, and so on, and why does it change? But that he started from a German philosopher, I think, but took it a few steps further. So it's sad that he couldn't continued to develop. I mean, he read a few books and wrote his articles, and then it ended. And the novel was never sent to that competition. It had been quite interesting. What would have been the answer from the jury? We don't know.
Talking about his novel, I don't know how you pronounce in Swedish, Sönder?
Sönder.
Sönder. The breaking away into pieces.
Yeah. It's and the Lithuanian, is it the same word? Suduso?
Suduso means, yes, it's when you drop a glass, it breaks into pieces. So that's what it means.
The result of, of this breaking.
It seems the same, almost the same meaning.
Almost the same, very similar. Yeah.
So my question would be for you, what is actually the original language of Söndern? Because originally Parland wrote in Swedish with his Finnish-Swedish language, using Finlandisms, and the publisher, the editor of the publisher, believed that this language is not proper for Swedish literature language. Therefore, he whimsically edited his language, got rid of Finlandisms, then even changed the names of some characters, changed the structure of the book, and if I'm correct, it is you who restored the original Swedish-Finnish language. You brought back only the Finlanders, though. So is it correct that the second publication is the original and the first publication is almost a fake?
No, not really. It's more complicated than that, but I can't show it, but anyway, it's digitalized, all the manuscript, so you can watch it yourself. But he wrote very tidy, Henry Parland, very tidy in Finland-Swedish, which is it's Swedish, but some expressions are a bit different. And the ones who usually read his things before publication, the poet Gunnar Björling, one of the most avant-garde poets in Finland-Swedish history, was the one who took away the Finlandisms. So, and Gunnar Björling had a very special handwriting, and he used a pencil instead of ink. So you can follow Gunnar Björling's. so he writes like that. So you can follow and you can say, okay, this edition and this editing out is by Björling, but and Björling did this just to protect or help Parland, although Parland was dead, and Björling and his friend Rabenkel, they read the novel when Parland was alive, so some of these changes can have been made because Parland was back in Helsinki for Easter 1930, and much of the novel was written. And then they must have sent the manuscript back to Parland, and he wrote a little bit more. And we have Björling's letters about the novel also. Anyway, Björling and Rabenkel were those who edited the novel. And to save or protect some people in the novel, they changed the names. So Gunnar in the novel, who looks very much like Gunnar Björling, became Gösta. And Ami became Ami with a Y. I can't remember. I haven't figured out why. And so on. Some other friends, they changed the names also. And they took away some portions of the text. And in the 1960s, Henry's brother Oscar edited the novel, and he brought back the names, but he also tried to, what did Henry want to do? And there's like a map of the novel with the chapters, and Parland, Henry, had some thoughts about the structure. He also started to write a bridge to put a part of the novel into the beginning of the novel. And his brother Oscar thought, okay, what will happen if we do what he started to do? So he because you know the structure, first you have the story until Ami is dead, and then the narrator starts again, because now she's dead, what can he say? So he starts from another angle. But some of the criticism from the friends who read the novel, they said that, yeah, but it's strange that you don't take it in a chronological way. So it started to, but it can't be done, because it gets mixed up, because it's also told in the third person and then in the first person. And if you mix those parts, you have to change very much. So anyway, Oscar did that, and it became a novel with 3 parts. So when I started my dissertation, or before I started my dissertation in the 90s, I read the different, there were 3 editions, and I couldn't figure out how it all started. How did it end this way? And then I contacted Oscar, who had this manuscript at his place. So my idea was to just publish the manuscript text, but also I had to edit some things, words that were written wrong, and sentences that didn't really work out. But then I used the first edition from 1932. Which solution had they, or at least I looked at the different solutions. So yeah, I restored the novel. And the funny thing is that all the people working on this novel were Finland-Swedish, but I'm Swedish. So a Swedish guy came and restored the Finland-Swedish and the colloquials and so on. And when we worked now at the collected works of Parland, we understood that some things that I changed when because Parland writes, for example, underfunnen instead of underfund. Also, I realized that word. He consequently writes it the wrong way. And now, when we worked with the collective work, we said, let's keep it, although it's wrong. But I wasn't that liberal. I was very liberal, but not that liberal. But now we were more liberal with the language. And the funny thing was that people, Finland-Swedish people and also Swedish people, they thought that was one part of the nice thing about the novel, because it might be the language of 1929 in Helsinki, if you had a Russian background, but still, because they had these words that high literature shouldn't have, and so on. So yeah, restoration is the right word.
So it seems like reading it in Lithuanian or in English, we lose a very important part of that book, which is the language, the specific language, because we look only for the content and for the ideas, but it has an entire dimension, from what I understood, his language.
It's a flavor that it's hard to to keep in a translation. But the English translator, Dinah Cannell, she was very fond of Parland's quirky language, as she called it. And she really tried to find a way to at least keep some of the quirkiness in the English translation. That was one of her goals with the translation. Not just the story, but also something of the language.
Well, thank you very much for such an interesting story. It seems like we could write a separate book about your work restoring. It's like a detective story to restore the original literature of Parland's novel. Thank you very much. I would like to remind our viewers that we just talked about Finnish-Swedish writer Henry Parland with Swedish senior lecturer per Stam and editor of Parland's novel Sönder to Pieces. This is our program, Freely and Critically, conducted by me, Tomas Kavaliauskas, and Professor Gintautas Mažeikis.